Recognize the honorable member for Nevis 11.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to this bill currently before this honorable House. And I rise because I feel that this bill must get the support of this side of the House, of course. And as my colleague would have intimated just now, and it reminded us that the mover of the bill said there's absolutely no way that we can oppose this bill. And he might be right about that, but I also want to look at a few things that I think should be mentioned here today. I've said it in the past, and I continue to say that this honorable House is about ensuring that we're doing the business of the people. And doing the business of the people means that when the government brings something that is worthy of support, all members, whether on the government side or the opposition side, must and should support. This one, of course, is one of those such bills where the interests of the people of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis must be served here today in ensuring that the protection that they should have as consumers is addressed through this legislation moving forward. But, Madam Speaker, I live within the boundaries of realism and pragmatism, and there are certain things that one have to question, and question them to get the best out of any legislation that comes. And I believe my colleague would have touched on the composition of the board that is going to oversee this particular bit of legislation. And let me say that consumer protection is being addressed through this legislation, but also those who are charged with given that mandate to oversee this legislation and to enforce, they also are a part of the protection process, meaning unscrupulous boards can do things that can harm consumers in the end as well too. And that is why it is important, as was raised before, that the composition of the board, which is articulated in the legislation, the composition is there, where the general public would need to know. Let me just read them out so that the general public that is following is aware of what the composition of the board is to be or should be like. It says here under Part 2, Consumer Protection Board. The board, of course, will be established, must be under this legislation. And the constitution of the board, as it says here, Part 2, Section 6 and Subsection 2, the board shall consist of a member who has knowledge and experience in the industry or in industry. B, I should have said A, and then B, a member who has knowledge and experience in commerce. C, a member who is an attorney at law of at least 7 years standing, who shall be the chairperson of the board. D, a member who has knowledge and experience in public administration. And E, a member who has knowledge and experience in consumer protection. Now it goes on in Section 3, or Subsection 3. The minister may appoint one of the members of the board to be chairperson, and another member to be the deputy chairperson of the board. Now, these three, Subsection 3, the minister may appoint one of the members of the board. There seems to be some conflict in the sense that C, the composition of the board says a member who is an attorney at law of at least 7 years standing, who shall be the chairperson of the board. And now it is saying in subsection 3 that the minister may appoint. I'm not a lawyer, but I've always heard of shall and may and interchange and interpose or whatever the case might be. So some clarity is needed there, because I am understanding that a lawyer who has 7 years shall, be appointed to be the chairman of the board. And then it says the minister may. So it seems as though there is some discretion on the part of the minister to appoint a chairperson, which it is very clear that the chairperson shall, and I could use the word must be, the chairperson of this particular board. That is just something to look at perhaps as we go along to make sure we are getting that right. But, Madam Speaker, there's something about the board that I am going to stick with that because I am concerned that board members, they must know and they must understand the authority that they would have under this legislation. And as such, they will be held to a certain standard, a very high standard as well, because we understand the legislation is meant to protect our people's health, their safety, and the likes. Now, this board is not a board similar to NHC board, for example. Cannot be categorized that way. It cannot be looked at as a board for Skelec, Nevlec, or any other institution or arm of government. This is a powerful board, and I say that clearly here today. It is a powerful board. We are trying also to ensure that we are consistent with other CARICOM territories that we are, where we have that relationship with. And as such, this repeal that is being done today and this passage of this bill, which will come, is indeed a quantum leap forward, in my opinion, in terms of the health and safety of our people. And that is why I am focusing on this board to ensure, as my colleague would have said before me, that we are not just, for political expediency or whatever the case might be, or to give somebody a board fee, just selecting persons to put on a board such as this, because we want to ensure that the board is doing what it must do. As a matter of fact, I don't know if it is being done here in St. Kitts, but I was in charge of a board at one point, and all of us had to go to the court, the High Court, to take an oath of secrecy. And why I say oath of secrecy is because persons, we live in a small society, and I do not think that the purpose of this legislation is to create harm in terms of destroying any business here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. I think the aim of this legislation is to ensure that all sides and all parties are being protected, meaning consumers, businesses, and also those who are sitting on those boards, they must be protected as well too. And they must understand they must protect businesses to the extent that we hear about flies and dogs and blah, blah, blah. Let's leave it as that. I would hope that that is not the case in St. Kitts Nevis, where dogs and cats and so forth are roaming among our food. But if that is the case, that is terrible. But the point I'm trying to make is that if, for example, the board is charged, I am looking at it's part 2, constitutional board, which is 6, section 6, and subsection C. Yeah? So, I'm talking about the preservation and integrity of food items and so forth. Now, all businesses, everyone who goes into business to serve customers to make money. And in so doing, they are also held to a certain standard by consumers. Now, for example, let's look at it by way of example. Let's be practical. Small community. St. Kitts and Nevis, relatively speaking, is very small. There's an investigation being conducted on Business A. Before it reaches anywhere, the information is on the street and all kinds of things are being said about that particular business because of the lack of confidentiality and that word that was used before, trust, that you should have coming from the board that is overseeing these things. So when that happens, how do you treat a situation like that? How do you treat board members who are not confidential, not trustworthy, and are leaking information out to the general public so as to cause harm to business A or any other business? There must be some checks and balance there. There must be something. And I don't think I see it in the legislation where there's any, I think I see any penalties for persons or members of the board who deliberately, and I will use the word deliberately because some will do it deliberately, go out there and create difficulties for the business community. And so that might be something that we may have to look at, perhaps, to ensure that there are penalties for board of, it says here though, that they can resign. Resignation, it can be done at any time. But I think that if you're going to hold businesses to a certain standard and perhaps charge businesses for anything that is considered unscrupulous, then at least board members should also be held to the same standard. And that is how you'll have some equity in the whole thing in terms of ensuring that everyone who is involved in the process is doing what they should do to protect the consumer. So that is something that I just wanted to put on the table to be addressed, if it can be addressed, whether today or at some point or the other, but it must be looked at that way. Madam Speaker, I also believe that if the board is doing their work, there must be regular reporting, whether monthly, annually, of numbers, meaning how many businesses. I don't want to get the name of the businesses. I don't think that is necessary. But how are we tracking the work of the board in terms of whether they're doing their work or not? If they're investigating, how many investigations were done? And what were the nature of those investigations? The general public would need to know that in terms of knowing what is being done by the board and whether our best interest is being looked after. So monthly or annual reporting, I believe, should be a part of the entire process so that persons could know what is happening in that regard. Now, Madam Speaker, it is not in this particular bill, but we're moving quickly in the realms of technology. Every minute there is some change in technology. I don't know if there's somewhere that could have been in this. We speak about goods and services, but a specific section about technology. Because here's why I bring it up. Cell phones, smart TVs, that kind of thing, especially cell phones, they end up in the hands of some of these persons who are repairing cell phones, for example. And I suppose the argument will be that there are laws on the books and the police may become involved, but I still think that, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I still think that there might be some need to address that particular bit of information in this bill in terms of how do you treat dealing with matters pertaining to technology in this particular legislation. And not so much someone having a difficulty and run to the police, but I may have to frame my thoughts in that regard, but I just think that the way we are heading as a country and as a global community, technology seems to be the major thing these days. You hear about AI, you hear about new smartphones moving from one level to the next. So I just think that technology should have formed part of this in some way. And that's just a suggestion. And it is just a thought that came to my mind, really. But anyway, Madam Speaker, I do believe that this bill, in terms of it replacing the original legislation that was there, which is called what? It's here now, it's 182 says it's Consumer Affairs Act, will be repealed by this particular bit of legislation or this bill, which is fine with me. And as was mentioned by my colleague, all of us are consumers and all of us would like to see the best being done, and who better to handle such affairs than the Parliament of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, to make sure that we are seeking to protect our consumer, seeking to protect our businesses, seeking to protect all of us, to ensure that we have a harmonious society moving forward. Madam Speaker, I didn't intend to labor too long on this one, but I just wanted to at least let my voice be heard and make those few points on this bill. And I close by saying that I believe that we are on the right track in terms of a parliament, in terms of what we are doing to address the practical things that need to be addressed here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And I wish this bill safe passage. And indeed, any adjustments that are necessary, let it be done. But by and large, the bill have my support. May it please you.
Thank you to